Greetings from Pavlo Ardanu, Fulbright Research Scholar at the Agricultural Sustainability Institute, University of California, Davis, and co-founder of the NGO Permaculture in Ukraine. Welcome to the series of video lectures on designing crop polycultures, which is supported by the International Visegrad Fund. The topic of this lecture is intercropping and designing crop polycultures. The third part will be dedicated to general design principles, approaches to modeling, and review of different polyculture cropping systems. The lecture is designed for the academic courses, thus it contains some advanced biological information. But it also contains a lot of practical information for growers. You can decide which section to skip depending on your preferences. Under description to this video, you will find the links to different sections of this video lecture, as well as to slides where you can study spreadsheets to design your own intercropping schemes. Let's continue with the principles. In addition to previously reviewed complementarity and facilitation, the third principle of ecological community assembly is selection of species possessing particular trait or sampling effect. This hypothesis assumes that systems containing a large number of species have a greater probability of containing species that are highly adapted to the limiting condition faced by the system or with high service delivery, for example, as an effective pest parasite. Combined planet and associated biodiversity in both cash crops, service crops, and associated natural and semi-natural habitats would increase agricultural benefits from sampling effect. There are several frameworks for designing agroecosystems with quite similar guiding principles. An example is ecological engineering, which is defined as the design of sustainable ecosystems that integrate human society with its natural environment for the benefits of both. Design frameworks commonly emphasize the concept of multifunctional agriculture, as well as the importance of creating spaces and habitats for wildlife in the agricultural landscape. Later presumes resource continuity at the landscape scale, particularly when source habitat for ecosystem service providers may be ephemeral. On crop fields, the so-called accessory crops, including cover crops, which are cultivated primarily for the ecological purposes, serve a role of integrating plant diversity over space and time. Plant mixtures can be arranged in many ways, with variations in species compositions and dominance, spatial arrangement, and age structure. Additive design, adding cultivated species to natural plant communities, for example growing ginsengs in forest farming. Substitutive design, when native plant species are replaced with functionally similar crop species. And intermediate design may be used to combine species in mixed cropping systems. An example of substitutive design is an experiment in Costa Rica with spatial and temporal replacement of wild species by botanically, structurally, or ecologically similar cultivars. The scheme is shown on the slide. To recreate multistrata system providing continual crop cover, avoiding site degradation and nutrient leaching, and to provide crop yield throughout the year. One of the emerging patterns shown in natural system is that grasses induce positive feedback on broad-leaved plants through plant-soil feedback. General approach of designing cropping system from nature includes identification of functions to be improved and determining the key species in natural ecosystems that fulfill those functions, when main accent is placed on functional characteristics rather than species composition of the vegetation to be mimicked, as well as to the main biological interactions existing between plants and animals in these ecosystems. Different schools of sustainable agriculture often operate such terms as companion plants and crop guilds, presuming non-random species assembly in natural ecosystems. Indeed, there are niche assembly and dispersal assembly rules, abiotic and biotic assembly rules that structure ecosystem in a non-random fashion, representing repeated modules of organizations. Researchers define three basic modularities guiding species assembly in ecosystems. First is a trophic level or food web module. The second is predators and diseases in space and time. And the third is trait-mediated cascades. Organisms can be often grouped in guilds, resource-sharing guilds, species that are sharing similar resources, for example, pollinator for a group of plants. Such guild is characterized by high redundancy and competition. The second is functional guild, what is typically referred by agroecology practitioners. This is an ecologically unified functional group of organisms with high niche partitioning and facilitation. Agroecosystems should be designed with high ecological resilience, the capacity to respond to a perturbation or disturbance by resisting damage and recovering quickly. Resilience is achieved by functional sustainability, with multiple interactions and feedback loops associated with more complex food webs, rather than by structural sustainability or maintaining the integrity of species. Thus, in frequently disturbed agroecosystems, integrity of functions may be achieved by system heterogeneity or patchiness. Patchiness or non-uniform distribution of seeds or plants also help to maintain higher species diversity by reducing competition between plants of various height growth strategies, which are capable to live together over multiple generations under patchy distribution. While in perennial plants, a higher amount of energy is allocated to structure and the smaller to biomass that can be harvested. Thus, their yield is lower compared to annuals. Agroecological functions and system resilience are generally maximized with perennial and forest-like habitats. Perennial systems still can be highly productive when considering nutritional, economic, and social benefits of their various products. The first principle of ecological engineering promotes a design based on the mimicry of natural structures and processes. It emphasizes self-organizations in agroecosystem based on complexity and diversity. There are two mimicry hypotheses for designing agroecosystems from natural ecosystems. First is that agroecosystems should mimic the structure and function of natural ecosystems existing in a given pedoclimatic zone. And the second is that agroecosystems should mimic also the diversity of species existing in natural ecosystems. In terms of mimicking ecosystem dynamics, it can be described as and analyzed in the form of a cycle, which can be broken down into four successive phases. A growth phase, then conservation, followed by senescence, and then reorganization. Each cycle or loop can be either similar or different from the previous one. Plants of the R-type or ruderals colonize the system during growth phase. They are usually annuals, fast-growing and adapted to disturbed environment. They are followed by the plants of the K-type, adapted to a more competitive environment for more scarce resources. Fecundancy, precocity, and productivity oppose plants of the R and K type. Example of utilization of this approach includes shifting agriculture in the tropics, that consists of alternative periods of fallow and cultivation. During the fallow period, successional vegetation takes place during soil restoration, and it can be diversely used, managed, and exploited. Other examples is the use of short-lived cover crops from the genera with rapid growth cycles, such as Brassica or Crotalaria, which are programmed to produce biomass and then die quickly. These plants can be used for sustaining continuous ground cover between successive cash crops and to prevent nutrient leaching. The structure and dynamics of plant communities can be strongly influenced by historical factors, including assembly and priority effects. So-called keystone species define diversity and number of other species in the ecosystem, for example, by creating benign microclimate. Also, species dominance in the mid-successional community depend on the identity of the early successional species. Polyculture performance is evaluated using land equivalent ratio, which is the area needed to produce the same output as 1 unit of land with a pattern of soil cropping. Situation with land equivalent ratio is over 1 is called overyielding, a phenomenon where plant production in mixture exceeds that of production in monoculture. The most beneficial intercropping situation, called a transgressive deviation, it occurs when the yield of the mixture is higher than the yield of its best components grown in monoculture over the whole of the same area. It represents crowding situation and is measured with the density equivalent ratio. An example of overyielding polyculture is a mixture of maize, bean, and pumpkin called Three Sister Garden. One mechanism for overyielding for species that grow fully at the same time may be competition avoidance that ensures niche complementarity in resource capture. Competition avoidance for light is based on the architectural species responses that reduce shading. For example, increased lengthening of the internodes. 3D stimulation of growth in Three Sisters polyculture demonstrated a spatial niche differentiation by different root systems and hence higher nitrogen uptake than the monocultures, while uptake of less mobile phosphorus did not benefit from combining these three species. Review of overyielding studies demonstrated the role of mobilization of phosphorus and micronutrients iron, zinc, and manganese by one of the polyculture components. Another study demonstrated that overyielding is also frequently observed in crop combinations without legumes, as you can see on the slide. Other structurally and functionally similar crops can also be tested under the concept of Three Sisters polyculture. For example, okra as structural support, watermelon as ground cover, and peanut and cowpea as nitrogen fixers. In this system, only watermelon and okra were the most competitive species and constantly overyielding species. Researchers concluded that proper plant spacing influenced the balance between competition and facilitation, and proper planting date influenced plant establishment in the mixtures, and similarly had strong effect on the total yield. There are several models developed to analyze and promote the use of crop mixtures by guiding the design of plant arrangement, the duration of temporal overlap, and plant characteristics, as well as to predict crop mixtures' behavior and the services they deliver. Two main modeling approaches are currently used nowadays. The first is process-based crop models, in which crop characteristics are represented at the field scale. And the second is individual-based models, in which each plant is represented individually at various levels of architectural complexity. Most individual-based models represent local interactions, individual variability, and the heterogeneity of resource partitioning within the field and the crop. However, such models require many parameters, which makes it difficult to generalize their use, require laborious data collection, and have high computational costs. Unlike process-based crop models, individual-based models does not consider sowing the dates and densities, fertilization, tillage, and irrigation. Both these models simulate well nutrient cycling and less accurately canopy growth, and they usually does not represent below-ground competition for resources, which can have larger effect on crop growth than above-ground competition. Also, crop models usually does not represent multiple biotic stresses, which is clear limitation of using them to stimulate low input or organic cropping systems. One way to represent plant-pest interaction is to combine crop models with pest models, and several simulation platforms have been developed to connect different models. Functional structural plant models can integrate the interaction between structural and physiological plant responses to the local resource availability and strengths of competition, which drives resource capture and growth of individuals in species mixtures. Most models assume that complementary resource acquisition between species result entirely from inherent differences between them and the structure of the plant community. But because plants are plastic, they can adjust their phenotype and associated resource harvesting pattern to the environment created by the other species. In functional structural models, plant growth and development is simulated in 3 dimensions as a function of underlying physiological processes driven by the environmental variables such as light or nutrient as resources for growth and signals for competition. Such modeling can virtually determine which plant phenotypes or combination of traits perform optimally in mixtures for a given range of conditions. It is critical that models are designed such that mechanistic stimulation of plant growth is based on the inherent plant characteristics, input the plant receives, and the influences it has on its immediate environment. Co-selection of species also needs to be considered when optimal trait expression in mixture depends on interaction between species. Traits can be architectural, such as stem length or root angle, physiological, such as photosynthetic efficiency or nutrient uptake, but it can also be the strength of responses to environmental cues, such as shade avoidance. In addition, growth limitation by the slowest feedback cycle and the mutual dependence of different resource acquisitions should be incorporated into the models. Polyculture cropping systems may include crop species, pasture species, trees, or combination of these. These systems can be classified according to the permanence of a specific crop assemblage or frequency of land use rotation. Then the intensity of intercropping, meaning the number, type, and level of spatiotemporal occurrence of crops within the field, and the percentage of tree canopy over the field. Different systems have a varied level of species diversity, both cultivated and associated diversity, level of interaction between different species, spatial and temporal diversity, and complexity. Consequently, different systems have varying management complexity and efficiency in providing various agroecosystem services. Primary means of annual crop arrangement in time include simultaneous intercropping, where mix of species or varieties per row or per strip planted and harvested simultaneously. Temporal intercropping, or sowing a fast-growing crop with a slow-growing crop so that the fast-growing crop is harvested before the slow-growing crop starts to mature. Relay cropping, when the second crop is sown during the growth, often near the onset of reproductive development or fruiting, of the first crop. Thus, when the first crop is harvested, it gives a room for the full development of the second crop. Double cropping, meaning planting two different crops with opposite growing cycle consequentially in the same field during a single year, when only one crop at a time occupies the field. And crop rotation, where two or more crops, commercial cover crops or fodder crops, are grown on the same land during consecutive years. Main ways to arrange crops in space, which can be referred to both perennial and annual crops, are early intercropping, planting rows of trees at wider spacing with a companion crop grown in the alleyways between the rows. Row intercropping, planting intermingled rows, which is preliminarily referred to annual crops. Strip intercropping as opposed to row intercropping where different crops are arranged in wider bands. And checkboard intercropping, which can be used to increase diversity of both annual and perennial crops, in particular when young and mature systems, as in orchard, have different management requirements and possibilities for diversification, including livestock integration. Here is another classification of polyculture systems that we have developed for our survey, based on the character and developmental stage of components, use of perennial crops, natural vegetation and service crops that are grown or preserved, mainly for providing ecological services rather than for market products, and integration with livestock. Here's another classification of diversified perennial cropping system according to the number of species, the horizontal and vertical structure of the mixture, and the life cycle duration of the species. Three types of annual crop mixtures can be defined according to their level of heterogeneity. Type A, in which plant components have similar phenologies and morphologies. Type B, in which plant components have contrasting morphologies but relatively similar phenologies. And type C, in which plant components have contrasting phenologies and morphologies. Spatial temporal arrangement of crop mixtures shall meet morphological and phenological heterogeneity requirement for harvest. For instance, relay strip intercrop of wheat and maize, type C, combine two species with highly contrasting phenologies. Therefore, they are usually sown on different dates in alternate strips to maximize resource use, which results in temporally separated harvest. While homogeneous genotypes of rice, type A, morphologically different genotypes of wheat, type B1, or barley and pea, type B2, have phenologies similar enough to be harvested at the same time. Thus, the sowing arrangement most often used for these mixtures are within row and alternative row mixtures, which enables close plant-plant interactions. The spatial temporal arrangement of annual crop mixtures influence crop yield directly through resource partition and indirectly through regulation of pests. In mixtures with homogeneous genotypes, type A, all individual plants experience approximately the same local abiotic environment. While in alternate row and within row mixtures, type B, crops with contrasting phenologies are closely mixed, thus crops interaction and its outcomes are more complex. In addition, strong border row effect is observed in relay strip crops mixtures type C between the strips. Thus, facilitation and complementarity effects, for example for nitrogen supply, diminish with increasing strip width, depending on the effective distance of crop interaction. For example, wheat overyielding in wheat-May relay strip intercrop was mainly due to increased growth of border row plants that received more light than inner rows before maize emerged. Meta-analysis demonstrated that alternative rowed intercrops do not perform as well as narrow strip intercrops. Alternate row mixtures with contrasting degree of resistance strengthen facilitation against pests, thus non-host crop rows serve as a physical barrier to pest movement between the host rows. Mixed intercropping, where the component species perform a specific function within the system, is particularly efficient for reducing inputs and increasing yield in suboptimal conditions. The outcome of mixed intercropping may depend on planting date and sowing density or spacing between the individuals to meet the needs of all component species, as demonstrated for mixture of 5 heat-tolerant species with complementary architecture and functions consisting of peanut, mini watermelon, okra, cowpea, and hot pepper. Precipitation variability between 2 years influenced either the outcome of species interaction will be competitive or facilitative. Species selected for annual intercrops should have similar growth rates to minimize asymmetric competition, as in pearl millet, sorghum Sudan grass, sunhemp intercrop of cover crop species. Relay intercropping is the strategy to reduce competition between crops and increase species complementarity due to species heterogeneity. Second crop is sown under the canopy of the first crop before its canopy will become too dense, often after weeding, or when the crop starts to senescence before harvesting, and molites can reach to the ground. To reduce competition with the earlier planted first crop, the second crop can be either quick-growing and drought-tolerant, or shade-tolerant and with slow initial growth. Combining varieties with varying degree of disease resistance and growth rate is a compromise between management simplicity and reducing pesticide use, increasing environmental resilience, and improving resource utilization, in particular in suboptimal conditions. Planting both late and early maturing varieties can help to sustain yield with unpredictable rainfalls, while diversity of locally adapted cultivars help to increase yield on poor soils to match different land types, soil moisture, and microclimatic conditions. In general, farming on slopes tend to be associated with greater diversity in both crops and varieties. In these cases, tolerant varieties are planted where there would otherwise be no vegetative cover to reduce erosion, and multiple varieties are planted to best match soil type. In video description below, you will find the links to slides, as well as references and highlights to publications cited in this video lecture. Finally, I invite growers of tree, nut, and fruit crops, all growers with experience in crop diversification, researchers and agriculture extension specialists to participate in one of the surveys listed on the slides. The links are also provided in description to this video. With your help, we will be able to develop free software to help farmers to design crop polycultures. We also invite you to subscribe to our Facebook page, Polycultures and Permaculture, where we share useful information on crop polycultures from the academic publication and directly from growers. And we invite you to share your practical experience on this page. On our website, you will find recorded conference presentations, proceedings and resolution of the Research and Practice Conference Polycultures and Permaculture, which was organized in January-February 2020. Thank you very much for your attention.